Video now.
All right.
And I should share my screen. I've not done that.
Very good. So we are recording then.
Okay, can you see my screen at least?
Yes.
You can also hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone from Switzerland. Dear stakeholders of the Uganda Impact Investing ecosystem, members of other National Advisory Board for Impact Investing and Task Force members of the Global and African Impact Investing Movement, welcome to this 21st event of our Impact Investor Circle Geneva SUC series, which was launched in the fall of 2020 under the theme Improving Access to Capital for Small Growth-Oriented Businesses in Africa, Searching for Long-Term Capital, which these businesses need for growth, especially for impact enterprises that are small or just starting out. So basically, there's an urgent need to scale up the supply of impact capital to meet the demand for impact capital. Despite recent growth of the impact investment sector, there is still a huge financing gap for the SDGs in Uganda, the size of which I hope one of our speakers can tell us today, especially when it comes to financing the gap to meet the needs of the SMEs. During the first 8 episodes of this Impact Investor Circle series, whose concept originated from the Impact Investment Exchange in Singapore, we have covered the most important stakeholders within the Zambian impact investment ecosystem, with a particular focus on the market enablers and the suppliers of impact capital. Then in the last quarter of 2021, we launched the second series, which focused on impact investing ecosystem in Tanzania, which today is represented by the NABII Taskforce lead, Dr. Nima Robert, with whom I have just written an article which should hopefully be released ahead of the Africa Impact Summit next month. The Global Steering Group today covers more than 35 countries through its plus 30 national and regional advisory boards, working to catalyze impact investing in their markets. Currently, only 4 African countries are part of the Global Steering Group movement, including, in addition to Zambia and Ghana, which joined in the same year, Africa's largest and second largest economies, Nigeria and South Africa. Today we are launching our 6th series by focusing on Uganda, which is at the very initial phase of a process leading to the establishment of a task force aimed at setting up a national advisory board for impact investing in Ghana, along with around 10 other African countries, such as Kenya, which we covered during the Q1 this year. And which the Africa coordinator, Ms. Acheno Utonglo, will speak to in her intervention on the process of joining the global impact investing movement today. This means that there will now be 3 NABs in the East Africa Economic Community once Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda join the Global Steering Group, 6 NABs within the tripartite free trade area once the same 3 countries, along with Ethiopia, South Africa, and Zambia joins. I make reference to the regional integration because the protocol on investment to the agreement establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area draft was concluded in October last year and adopted at the ministerial level by the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement Council of Ministers. Perhaps these African NABs within the same regs could look into expanding your policy engagement at both the national level as well as the regional and continental level. So we are very happy about presenting the 3rd East Africa community country covered in the series today, namely Uganda. Uganda's population has a population of 45.9 million people, roughly half of whom are under 18 years of age, which are driving the adoption of a digital solution to the country. So Uganda is the 2nd largest impact investing market in East Africa after Kenya. In fact, All the way back to 2015, the Global Impact Investing Network enumerated that there were at least 119 impact capital vehicles active in Uganda, managed by some 82 non-DFI impact investors, nearly as many as in Kenya. Excluding the DFI activity, in 2015, there had been at least 139 impact deals in Uganda, resulting in more than $300 million dispersed, more than 20% of all investment activity in the East Africa overall. Thus, within East Africa, Uganda boasts the second highest number of deals and the second largest amount of capital dispersed in support of social and environmental impact. And the market was expected to continue to grow since 2015, which we will find out today whether this has actually been the case. Uganda has experienced significant growth in GDP over the past decade, and the World Bank was predicting that Uganda's purchasing power parity to continue to increase by 170% by 2019, which is 4 years ago, which would open up new investment opportunities. As you know, social impact investors take into consideration government incentives, repatriation of profits and dividends, foreign exchange controls, land ownership, and land and local ownership requirement as they look into investing in East Africa and in developing countries. Currently, the sectors attracting the most social impact investing in East Africa are agriculture, energy, tourism, fast-moving goods, consumer goods, and financial services. Most impact investors interviewed in 2015 by the GIN noted that there was no significant country-specific impediments to impact investing in Uganda, but rather that the primary challenge was a less favorable business environment than they perceived in Kenya. Impact investors at the time saw considerable potential, and as the country continues to grow, they expected the general business environment to improve, presenting more opportunities to drive social change through sustainable social enterprises. I hope that today's event, held almost 8 years later, will give us and the attendees a chance to see if this optimism has come through, and if not, how the future NABII Uganda could help address some of the binding constraints preventing Uganda from fulfilling its potential for an impact revolution. Okay, so 4IP Group and the Swiss Impact Investing Associations are proud to host today's interactive Impact Investing Circle webinar featuring prospective board members of the forthcoming Uganda-NABII Taskforce, who are all leading practitioners within Uganda's impact investing ecosystem, as well as the contribution of other impact investing ecosystem players. The agenda is structured as follows. After my introduction, Mr. Ben Banerjee, President of the Swiss Impact Investing Association and CS representative within the Swiss National Advisory Board for Impact Investing Task Force, will briefly present his experience within the Swiss Task Force and the work he is currently doing to promote the COP28 in Dubai. And then Ms. Neema Robert will briefly share some lessons learned from the NABII Tanzania and how the process was launched and where they are in the process. She will be followed by Dr. Amit Asham Singh, who will share similar observations from the lessons learned from the NABII-Mauritius task force, which he is leading. He will briefly be followed by Mr. Johan Franzen, the founder of EndNest, the new digital infrastructure for the trusted local and global entrepreneurship ecosystem, which we are working with to make EndNest the home of Africa's impact revolution, if and when adopted by all existing and coming national advisory boards on the African continent and beyond. And finally, Mrs. Atieno Otongolo will present a few overarching elements of the Global Steering Group Africa strategy as coordinated by herself, and perhaps highlight a few key achievements on the continent since she started her role, including the Africa Impact Summit next month. And after this introduction, we'll have 4 representatives of the Ugandan ecosystem presenting. The first is Mrs. Doris Udit Achanga. She is the coordinator of the chapter of the East Africa Private Equity and Venture Capital Association chapter in Uganda. She will be followed by Mr. Ronald Mukasa Sinkukwepe, who is a financial literacy coach, business development advisor, and personal finance trainee. And then we were supposed to have had Mrs. Olivia Binyanya, who is the Regional Transaction Advisor and also the coordinator of the Manufacturing Association in Uganda, but unfortunately she just told me that she will not be able to make it today. So instead she will be followed by Mr. Kenneth Legacy, who is leading Autos Africa Capital and is also the leader of Uganda's Angel Investor Network. And after those presentations, the representatives of other NABs on the continent will have a chance to ask a few questions, and I will also raise a few questions. And then the other attendees will have an opportunity to ask questions to presenters. And then the event will end with a few concluding remarks from myself. Remember, this is a live session. It's being recorded. I have to emphasize that because not everyone is usually aware of that. And the recording will be uploaded on both the Swiss Impact Investing Association as well as 4IP Group YouTube channels before the end of this week. And we will share it with all prospective and actual impact investors investing in the East Africa community as well as Uganda, in the hope that you, through your investment, will assist financially and technically Uganda's impact enterprises scale their solution for those prioritized sustainable development goals which you have incorporated into your business operations. I will also write an article, as I did in the case of Tanzania and Kenya, for the Impact Entrepreneur magazine, where I'm a correspondent, partly based on information that I will gather today through today's session. And let me quickly present the house rule. Please mute your microphones whenever you are not speaking throughout the entire event in order not to disturb the speakers, the listeners, and of course the recording. And during the Q&A, remember to introduce yourself by name and affiliation and keep the questions short. Please do feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box on EndNess. And you can also raise pertinent questions on the chat box. And for those of you who have not created an account on EndNess, please do so, which of course will allow us to continue the engagement both during as well as after the event. So with these words, I hand over to the president of SIIA, Ben Banerjee. So over to you, Ben.
Okay, thank you, Christian, for inviting me to this event. And I think there were a couple of points which you mentioned. One is that the gap between the investment fund and the impact investment resources and the businesses, I think it's not only limited to Uganda, it is valid all around the world. That's unfortunately the truth. The second issue is you mentioned the ecosystem. The NAB, since I'm also in the NABII Taskforce and Swiss government, the issue is that the NAB is created in every country mainly from their own ecosystem. So it is the ecosystem of the country that pushes forward the NAB, which has lots of positive sides, but which also may have some negative sides, which you must be aware that Switzerland is one of the ones which we are facing the issue. In my opinion, the issue Switzerland facing is the stakeholders, especially one group, that's the financial institutions, mainly the banks, pension funds, or the government financial institutions, and their lobby groups are too powerful. And that creates also kind of disbalanced NAB. If you compare it, for example, with Netherlands or with Finland, where I also have been active with, is that it is much more balanced. And there you also have the civil societies, you also have the businesses as an equal stakeholder, which is unfortunately yet not the case in Switzerland. So that's one of the issues Switzerland's facing. So the most important place to get into NAB is, first of all, what do you want to achieve? Of course, it's valid. I mean, everybody of us knows why we have to get it. We have to be an impact investment. We have to get part of the GSG. That's not the point. Point is how to get it. And the most important pillar, one of the most important pillar, is the governance. So every country should decide what governance model works for it. In some cases, like in Netherlands, the governance model came very much from the civic societies or from the financial institutions. In countries like Japan or Finland, the governance model came very much from the government. So it really depends on countries to countries, and every country has to find out itself which governance model works. as long as it works, which is the most important. So I think with this, and oh yeah, and you mentioned about the COP28. So we have been active, basically supporting the gap, supporting the businesses who are seeking funding, and we support them by getting them funding from our network. And we are by far the largest group of impact investors in Europe. So we support the businesses and try to bring them together and get them funded. And doing that, we are now creating the world's largest impact investment center in UAE, which would have incubators, accelerators, funds, investors, and businesses all at one place. But this may be very interesting for the Africa region, because this center of UAE will be servicing the whole MENA region. So that is Middle East and North Africa. But of course, when you speak about MENA region, you can always pull it down to include the rest of Africa. And as you know by now, that the Swiss, sitting in UAE, you are much nearer or much better connected to the emerging markets like Africa and Asia than sitting in our little villages in Switzerland. So with this, I just want to say thanks for now.
Thank you so much, Ben, for these observations and for sharing your experience, and particularly when it comes to the important COP28 in Dubai, where you play an instrumental role. Okay, so we'll move on to our next speaker. This is Dr. Nima Roberts. She's the head of the National Advisory Board for Impact Investing Task Force in Tanzania. So, Nima, over to you, please.
Sure. Good evening, everyone, and thanks, Christian, for inviting me in this call to say a little bit about what is happening here in Tanzania. And I should say I'm happy that our neighbors, Uganda, are also joining us in this very important movement, not only for our individual countries, but also for the region, the East African region, and Africa at large. So I'll share a little bit on our experience, as you said, and maybe a little bit on why Tanzania wanted to have a NAB here, how we managed to do it so far, and where we are. And as others, and probably that's one of the reasons which also push other NABs, we want to have a NAB to execute and create a platform of partners working together to solve complex issues at the scale of a country, and leverage on the national and international assets and expertise, which we don't only have it in our individual countries, but also we can also share it from other national and international assets. But also we understand that NABs are great vehicles for delivery of field intelligence, essential infrastructure, such as impact funds and policies, as you mentioned, Christian, for also practice knowledge, network connection, and other concrete deliverables. But also we believe that their success in attracting motivated leaders from across sectors and their capacity to draw from a growing international body of evidence, literature, and practice provides a unique platform to engage governments and policymakers. We realize that people have been working individually, but there's something else, or there's something which is obtained when we start working together as different motivated leaders for the ecosystem. So among the reasons, as I said, we want to be able to enhance the ethical investments for achieving sustainable economic growth, have this enabling environment, which are impact based, also to facilitate the access to impact finances for MSMEs, especially by connecting the demand and supply side, which is still very huge in our country, and also to create this win-win investment policy environment for both investors and ecosystems. And I should say that this is good to say, and it's good maybe to present as I'm presenting, but the journey from 2021 until now, it has not been that smooth. Maybe I should mention that for our fellows who are joining us in this. We started back in 2021, and we started with some early ecosystem development work, having some kind of meetings and connections with people who have interest in the ecosystem. And of course, GSG has been very generous to provide some supporting tools and documents in the process. And it was very important for us to have confirmation of interest of group leaders or different actors who wanted us to join in the task force. And maybe I should emphasize on that it's very, very important to make sure that those people who join in the task force really have that passion and interest on the ecosystem for that particular cause. So we did some sort of convening and validation of partners at that stage, which of course makes some people in, makes some people out. As you proceed, you can realize there are people who will jump out, others will jump in as they understand the movement. But it was important to get the support in convening the right group as we proceed forward. In the process, we managed to have a task force of 15 people up to now, which is active task force. And of course, we have a huge, more than almost 50% is from the demand side. We have some representative from the intermediation part. We have some representative from the government and regulations and policy and advocacy, which is really important, and for us to have them in our group. Also, we have representative of market builders and professional services, researchers, academia, lawyers, to guide us in the process, and it has been very, very helpful. Of course, we are still having some conversations with some representatives for the supply for impact capital so that they can also join us in the ecosystem. We are getting there, but still we cannot say we confirm and put a name on the list. But so far, that's the team which we have. And maybe to finish, I should just mention a little bit on our planned activities. For this stage, we already have a concept note which we've been sharing to the potential partners to join us in the process. And we plan to do a number of activities to unlock the opportunities for expanding the volume of capital. Christian just presented and say Uganda is the second after Kenya, and we're really looking forward for Tanzania to climb up the ladder. Also to do a lot of awareness and capacity building, which has been a huge gap in our country. Do more research and dissemination of findings, some dialogues and cross-section linkages, of course, some policy advocacy, and other outreach services. So maybe, Christian, I should just stop for now. That's basically what is going on in Tanzania. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Nima. This was excellent. I hope that it was our colleagues in Uganda took note of that. That's it, and realize it's not a smooth ride. It can be bumpy at times, but perseverance and tenacity, as I said in Roland Garros, it what bring you to the top of to the end of the process. So and good luck with the continuation, Nima, and I look forward to seeing you hopefully in Cape Town next month. So with that, we move on to our next task force lead, which is my friend Dr. Amit Ashim Singh, who's the head of the task force in Mauritius. So Amit, over to you.
Oops. You ended up on mute there at the end, Christian. We didn't hear the last sentence from you.
Oh,
but
okay.
I think
but I'm passing on to Amit, who is the head of the task force in Mauritius. So over to you, Amit.
Thank you very much, my dear friend Christian. It makes a long time. Thank you, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here, John. Nice to see you again after some time. So I just want to step back for some time just to reflect on the urgency of the situation here. You know, we are speaking about Africa, and there's a sense of urgency in the sense that we have growing inequality. We are lagging behind in terms of the SDG outcomes, and impact investing is obviously more important than ever before. At the same time, you see in Mauritius, for instance, right now, we have, you know, a lot of economic problems in terms of rising prices, of, you know, a soaring, you know, balance of payment deficit, very high levels of imports, low exports. So the government is trying to correct the situation, but there's a lack of basic virtues here, in the sense that the important part to remember here is that impact investing works best when there's a set of basic virtues in place. So good governance, meritocracy, a good sound economic model, This all helps to make impact investing very effective. And in Africa, obviously, as we know, those virtues are very often lacking. So I can vouch for Mauritius. I know that the problem is quite more acute in other parts of Africa, but in Mauritius too, I can say that we are also in a quite difficult situation when it comes to the governance of the country. You can read and find out for yourself. But in terms of our experience, therefore, there was a cry really to set up a new economic model for our country, to design one. And so as an economist, I felt that sense of urgency, and we set up with some colleagues last year, in January it was, we set up National Advisory Board on Impact Investing, which has been really from then a slow learning process, but quite an educative one, yes. And we are starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel. Let me give you some facts here. So when we started off, obviously in January 2022, it was slow, yes. We had to consult various stakeholders in the country, like the Economic Development Board, Business Mauritius, which groups entrepreneurs in the country, to make them aware of impact investing. And I have to just tell you that many people here in Mauritius are very much confused about that term impact investing. They say, oh, what is the difference between ESG and impact investing? Is that the same stuff we are talking about here? At the time, there was the launch of the SDG investor map in December. I remember, I mean, we are talking about, big private firms in Mauritius and billions of turnover every year. And they are very much focused on ESG, but they never heard about the term impact investing before. Then I realized that the first thing which should be done is really, it's about education. What is impact investing all about? So this is why Christian and myself, we plan to roll out a course on impact investing. We are getting there. And this awareness campaign is very important even before we start to get some traction about hands-on practical investment projects that will make the change happen and achieve those SDG outcomes. So we have started through education. We have gone through that phase. Then we have started to interact with various stakeholders around the country to try to bring them together with us on the board. And like Nima, we have done the same process here, attracting a network of people now on our task force from different backgrounds, from the private sector all the way to the government. But as I said before, it all depends on the kind of the type and the quality of the government that you have in your country. The momentum will be really gathered when you have people who have an economic vision, who are really concerned about economic transformation. And, at the moment, it's really a big problem here. And that's why we have been very slow in gaining momentum. But I felt one of the turning points with NABII Mauritius has been our partnership with the United Nations. You see, United Nations, it has international credibility. Whether you have an incompetent government in Mauritius or not, doesn't make any difference, in the sense that they won't be able to, you see, in Mauritius, it works like that. If you are very close to the government, they will listen to you, they will take all your ideas into account. But the moment you are very factual and objective, say, no, this is not something right that you're doing here. We have to try to make a paradigm shift. That's a new economic model which will create jobs, will improve economic growth, will address those SDG outcomes. Those factual considerations are shrugged off very often because they don't like to hear criticism, for instance. So when we started to partner with the United Nations Development Program, the UNDP, then we felt that we started to see the difference, because you see, governments have a lot of, they pay a lot of attention to those international credible groups of the United Nations Development Program, because they give a lot of funding to the country, they help to identify projects. And so when we partnered with the United Nations Development Program, and I attended the SDG the launch of the SDG Investor Map in December, then I started to see some changes in the mindset of the government, which obviously has been slow, but yet it is starting to happen. So one of the considerations which I would like to share with you is that in setting up a NABII and implementing it and trying to gain traction, strategy is very important in the sense that you should first consider the environment in which you're evolving first. And from that environment, you should see where are your strengths, where are the problems, where are the hurdles, and then work your way through it. Our pathway has been quite gradual in the sense that it has been a stumbling process at the beginning, but as soon as we started to partner with international organizations like the UN, for instance, things have started to turn around, and people have started to really be very attentive to what we say. Even the big private entrepreneurs, the Economic Development Board, Business Mauritius, we have even the State Investment Corporation, which is a government-owned entity. So they have started to pay more attention to the philosophy behind impact investing. And I also feel that that kind of momentum is also gaining traction given the economic situation I described in Mauritius. There's an urgency for a new economic model. You see, in Mauritius from the 1990s onwards, there has been a time of financial liberalization, an adoption of a model of capitalism which has been ruthless and extreme in the sense that profit-making has been the only concern of the entrepreneurs here. And we have reached like a peak here where people have started to feel that this model has failed us. When you see the growing level of inequality around and you see lack of jobs, the rising cost of living. So impact investing in a way tries to restore, in a way, a balance to society, in the sense that it brings with it a more embracing view of the world, more humane view of the world, and a shift from that old model of ruthless profit maximization, what we say shareholder capitalism, and move from that model to a more embracing view, which is known as the stakeholder capitalism view of the world, where you are more compassionate about how you can approach politics, economics, and so on. So that kind of philosophy now has gained traction, and impact investing in a way has given it more momentum. And as we are getting to the election year, and which will be quite not very far, I suppose maybe next year, we feel that people now will pay a lot of attention to the discourse of those people who want to be elected and be in parliament. And ESG issues, impact investing issues will start to play a big role in the political agenda, which is a good thing, because then people will start to see who are really interested in bringing real change in the country. So in my view, therefore, we can say that impact investing is new. People are very much confused about the term still here in Mauritius. So education is a process that we have to go through, and in a very simple way explain the differences between ESG and impact investing. From there, we start to build a task force made up of a variety of stakeholders, very much involved in trying to bring economic transformation in the sense of creating high value-added jobs in terms of having measurable impact, positive impact on society while minimizing the negative impacts. Very much concerned about issues of food security, climate change, gender equality. So those issues are now very pressing here. And I'm really very, we just completed Nima and myself. Nima is from Tanzania. Nima and myself, by the way, were colleagues from Stellenbosch University. We completed a PhD in development finance some time back together. And for us, impact investing is really like a mission to transform Africa. And it's a slow process, it's a learning process, but we have drive. We have drive, and we are passionate about it, like Christian is, and many of you here around, and will not stop, obviously. We feel that there's a lot of work to do here in Africa before really we get the results that we're expecting.
Okay.
So I will stop here, Christian, and I can take some questions if you have some.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amit, for sharing the experience. Just like in Tanzania, as the listeners could hear, that it's not a smooth process, but that's why it's so important to have tenacious task force leads such as Nima and yourself to keep the boat floating towards the right port. So keep it up, Amit, and I very much look forward to seeing you in Cape Town next month.
Yeah.
So take care.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so
Thank
we
you.
quickly move on because we have a big agenda ahead of us. So the next speaker is the host of today's event, which is Mr. Johan Franzen, founder and CEO of the Endness platform. So Johan, you want to share a few words with the attendees?
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me here also, Christian. And I have to start with saying again, I'm very sorry for the debacle here with the video links. Unfortunately, the video tool provider had done some changes there, which has impacted this opportunity here. So we will need to improve on that, of course. Okay, overall, Endness, what is the intent and who are we and what do we do? So the intent is very much linked to what all of you have talked about. Okay, Cassidy, if you can mute there, I'm going to try to mute you also. Yeah, that's good. So what both Christian, Ben, Nema, and Amit have also touched upon is you need to have the right people getting together. And that's the most important thing, I think, in so many different things that is being worked at. And that is the core of Endness, bringing passionate, purpose-driven people into the same discussion room for the opportunities of creating more synergies instead of fragmentation and duplication. So Endness is built on invitation only. We are connecting a lot of different elements in the same toolbox for increased efficiency and productivity. And we want to create a network of trusted networks that have an opportunity then to create these increased synergies through collaboration and complementation rather than the fragmentation and the duplication and confrontation that is happening in so many places around the world today. And I have to say, I think it's very challenging. It's not just in Africa, Amit, what you mentioned, and Nema. We also see and hear from Ben and Christian that Switzerland, we have not even been able to set up the NABII in the first place. So Amit and Nema, you have come further than the Swiss organization at this point in time, which is still a very, very good sign. But by getting together a little bit further, I think we can really create the future of work. And I think it's very important to think of the entrepreneurship ecosystem as the future of both the work, but also making it more formal, the formal economy, right? We have a lot of informal economies, and we need to get to a lot more formality in a number of these different things. And we need to do that through reducing the separate communities, reducing the fact that we're all overwhelmed and a bit inefficient and a lot of mistrust and so on here. So that is what Endness is trying to do. So we cater to the interests of the full entrepreneurship ecosystem, the different support organizations, the aspiring founders, the established founders, and so on. We need to look much more at quality rather than quantity. If you look in LinkedIn and many other places, and don't get me wrong, I'm of course also using LinkedIn and a lot of the other tools, but it's very often becoming a place of monologues where it's just for selling. And we need to get to the other side of the coin, which is talking about what are the needs and how we can fulfill those needs together for the larger issues to be tackled in a good way. So invitation only. all-in-one toolbox, a network of networks, and then let's start organically grow a little bit further with inviting the right people. And when people are inside, everybody can see who invited who. So it's not like in LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever, where if you need a new profile for whatever reason, you simply create it and nobody can actually verify that it's actually you behind, even if you pay your $9 or whatever to Twitter. That's still quite a challenge. In EntNest, really, you can see who have invited who. And Christian, we need to make sure, of course, that your people gets into EntNest here. And I think that will also reduce the risk that we had with these different video links and so on there. So again, I'm very sorry for these issues here, but I think the future is very bright and we need to work together to create that future that we all want, something which is much more in line with sort of conscious capitalism rather than the individualistic capitalism where everybody is wanting to make as much money on whatever ways they can, right? We need to make this sustainable now. Sustainable impact investing is the future. I'll stop there, but I'm happy to take any questions later on, of course, also. Thank you very much again, Christian.
Thank you very much, Johan. And we hope that in Cape Town, where all of the NABs will meet in person and gather next month, that will mark the big turning point, and in a hope that the NABs will encourage all the members of their stakeholder system to use the platform and all of the various functionality that the platform offers the members of the ecosystem. So thank you very much, Johan, for once again hosting our series. So then we move on to the last speaker of the first part, which is Mrs. Etieno Utonglo. She's based in Nairobi and she's a Global Steering Group Africa Coordinator. She will speak a little bit about what her role is on the continent to help the impact revolution take root. Over to you, Etieno, if you're there. I don't know if I can see her.
I don't see her right now, unfortunately. No.
Okay. Okay. So we'll try and invite her for the next event on the 29th of June, so she can speak to that. So we will quickly move on to the core part of the program, not to diminish what our colleagues have said already so far, but today, as you know, the focus is on Uganda. So we have an excellent panel today, and the first speaker of the panel is Mrs. Doris Acheng Udit. As I mentioned, she's the country coordinator for the Uganda chapter of the East African Private Equity and Venture Capital Association, which was founded in 2013. In other words, she's representing the East Africa's private equity and venture capital industry. So, Doris, over to you, please. And I know you have a presentation, so you can upload it. Johan, I can guide you.
Yeah. Just a correction. So representing the Uganda chapter of the East
Yes,
Africa.
that's right. Okay.
Yes. Let me just share this. Let me know if it's visible on your end.
Yeah.
Yes, it's visible. Thank you.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, so Christian asked, when he invited me for this session, he asked me to paint a picture of the investment landscape in Uganda, and primarily who's playing where and why, of course, through an impact investment lens. So Christian, I think at the onset, provided some statistics on a study that was done a couple of years back. So probably this is just to update the information in that report. So in 8 minutes, I'll attempt to give a bird's eye view of the fund intermediated private capital investment landscape in Uganda. And that is over a period of 2005 to 2022. And because the landscape of investing is more or less a system, within that system, just focusing on that deal activity over the years. So I think there was one presenter, I think Amit mentioned that ESG is often conflated with impact. But at the end of the day, when we're speaking from a perspective of private equity and venture capital investments, most, if not all, private capital providers are investing with an impact focus. So investors are either integrating ESG considerations into their investment decisions and strategies as a means of achieving the triple bottom line, also as a risk management strategy. And this is primarily given that LPs usually want this focus in the funds they're investing in. Or you'll find investors are pure impact, and here they are deliberately focusing on sectors with the highest likelihood of achieving their SDGs. So primarily, not all investors are impact investors, but most investors into Africa have an impact focus. So in terms of where the industry stands right now from the perspective of Uganda, so this is just this is based off data from IAFA's deal tracker as pertaining to Uganda. So IAFA has in place a deal tracker for Uganda that has tracked investments since 2005 as internal data. So over a period of 17 years, starting say 2005 to 2022, the aggregate total of fund intermediated investments, and when I say fund intermediated, it's recognizing the other investment segments. So there's direct investments from DFIs, there's catalytic investment as well. So this is primarily fund intermediated investments. So total value of those investments in aggregate as at 2022 was about $0.6 billion, so $600 million, depending on how you read that. And nearly 2/3, of investments were attributable to the period between 2015 and 2022. So it's about close to, give or take, round it up to $400 million in cumulative amounts. So in terms of the progression of the industry, there's evidence of consistent growth, but also of an industry that has been evolving. So we can classify the industry into, say, 3 inflection points. So just share a few graphs there. So into 2 inflection points. So the first inflection point is during the first 10 years of the industry as we know it. And that's from 2005 to 2015 as pertaining to Uganda and as pertaining to fund intermediated investments. So during this period when there were few investments, primarily debt, into enterprises by industry veterans, so we have Pearl Capital Partners here, Growthin, most of the fund intermediated private capital investments were heavily leaning towards energy infrastructure. So you'll see in the first graph there, say in 2007, in terms of investments, there's a peak of $120 million, but that was a single investment into a hydropower project by Blackstone. And then in 2009, there's also a peak of $34 million in aggregate investments in the year. But that was attributable to a single investment in another energy entity, being an energy distributor, Umeme. So essentially, the second graph that's below is cleaned for those anomalies. And in the second graph, then now you can start seeing a natural progression of growth. And from the second graph, then you see from 2005 to 2011, 13, maybe entering 2014 a bit. The investments primarily into enterprises was present, but not substantive, with a few known players. So the industry starts to pick up in around 2014, 15, 16. And this is the second inflection point. So it is at this point when we start to see substantive investment into enterprises. outside infrastructure. This is when we see the entry of a lot of new players, East African focused funds, so Ascent, Yungo, XSML Capital, among others, as well as veterans such as
Doris?
I think we lost Doris.
in sectors with a strong tie interest, notable ones being agriculture, healthcare, and financials. So in ticket sizes of about $250,000 to 40 million. So the next inflection comes in 2020 during the pandemic. So we see a few investors now start to enter the high risk startup world. Prior to that, it was primarily growth stage focused investments in established companies. So now we start seeing 2020 a few venture into the startup world. So a few notable names, but most of these in profile are family offices, corporate venture capital, or funds that have angels as backers, and so they are more dynamic in their ability to take on a bit more risk than, say, traditional private equity providers. And then now comes 2022. So we see a flood of primarily US-based venture capitalists investing in Ugandan startups. So these then represent disruptive entry point. So just to illustrate, in 2022, venture capital investments into tech accounted for 70% of fund intermediated investments in the country. So the businesses then we see these global venture capital investors interested in are primarily fintech. And of course, there's a strong tie-in between fintech and some of the development agendas, because fintech addresses the access to finance gap among small enterprises. So some of the fintechs playing in the border space, or providing microloans to micro enterprises. So still addressing some of those pain points. And then a few other interesting segments that we see are in agri-tech and insurtech. So as to where the industry seems to be heading, so international venture capital investments will probably emerge as a dominant player in Uganda's investment landscape. Nevertheless, private equity investors investing in growth stage opportunities still see an opportunity investing in some of the traditional sectors that have driven investments, or manufacturing, agriculture, health. There's also an emerging homegrown industry of locally domiciled funds, and we hope that, given that this is a space that is growing from within Uganda, that is local fund managers with local funds, then hopefully they will understand the nuances of Ugandan enterprises, and this will be key to expanding access to alternative financing. So as to the impact achieved through this $0.6 billion, or 600 million, depending on how you want to phrase it, over the period between 2005 to 2022. So most of these funds do track, if not all, track the impacts they're achieving through their funds internally, sharing this internally, in public, and others share this with their LPs. But I think it's important to measure impact as in terms of an industry in aggregate that has been created in aggregate, which is key to pushing some of the policy agendas as well, because it's a good selling point but primarily in lobbying, when you can demonstrate that an industry actually has an economic impact. on a country. So it could be from something as simple to how many jobs have been created per dollar invested, how many of these jobs went to women, how many went to youths, and all that. So it's very important as my closing remark to just measure this impact in aggregate. Yeah. So I'll hand it over to you, Christian.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Doris, for sharing a very positive upward going trend, particularly in the last couple of years. We can see that there's a steep upward going trajectory. So we hope that with the arrival of the National Advisory Board, more impact investors, both based on the continent as well as in Europe, will take a keen interest on the many opportunities that you find in Uganda. So thank you very much for that, Doris, and you'll get a chance to elaborate further during the Q&A. So we'll continue quickly to our second speaker, which is Mr. Ronald Mukasa Sikumbuye, who is a financial literacy coach, business development advisor, and personal finance trainee. So Ronald, over to you. You need to, Doris, stop sharing your screen. You do that by clicking on the third icon. Yeah, okay. So that's Fiorina. Hello, Fiorina. How are you? But you're not the right speaker today. That's Ronald. Okay, great. So Ronald, over to you.
Super. Thanks a lot. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's an honor being here. I think from the speakers I've had so far, I have more questions than what to share. But I'm very, very honored to be a part of this conversation today. My name is Ronald. I've been part of the entrepreneur ecosystem in Uganda. While I had an opportunity to participate, I think, Christian, that's how you got my contact with the Uganda Entrepreneur Ecosystem Initiative. Currently, I work with Enterprise Uganda, which is an organization that supports small and medium businesses to grow. And it's such an honor being here. I want to thank the speakers who have shared. I think the previous speaker kind of gave us a big highlight on what is exactly happening in the country right now. So I think that really introduces Uganda to you in terms of where we are at right now as a nation with regard to investment and exciting things happening. I think Amit earlier talked about the challenges of Africa. I don't think Uganda is unique, but it also is really dealing with these challenges. But I think Doris's presentation has shown that there is progress which has been made. I think on my part, really what I want to add to the conversation is I just want to share from the perspective of the entrepreneur, the person who receives the impact investing. I've had an opportunity to spend a while, possibly for the last 12 years, working largely with small and medium enterprises. And I guess one of the things which for me is important, and I think Doris touched on this about getting into spaces of supporting small and medium businesses. I think the key thing which we really need to be working on, and which I hope that this conversation can be able to build on, is this idea that the person who needs the
Sorry, Ronald, for interrupting you. I can already hear what you're saying is providing a lot of value addition to the conversation, but unfortunately the connection is not very good. So I'm just wondering, now that we know what you look like, maybe it's better to turn off the video so we can just hear your voice, because I think you are bringing a lot of interesting things to the conversation. So try again. Johan, can you hear what Ronald is saying? From my side, it's...
No, it's nothing I can do about that, unfortunately, there, but...
Okay, we're going to give you another try, Ronald, because it's very important that we also get demand side, the speaker of the demand side, yeah.
I thought we heard pretty well until you intervened a little bit there, Christian, but yeah, let's see if we can hear it later on. And we move on to the next one first.
Try one more time, Ronald. Ronald, can you hear me? Okay, I don't know if you can write a message, Johan, just to let him know that we'll give him a second chance after we take the next speaker, just because we're a little bit behind schedule. Okay, thanks a lot. Okay, so while we hopefully we've managed to get a good line directly to Ronald, we'll go on to our third and final speaker from Uganda, who is Mr. Kenneth Legezi, who's the CEO of Autos Africa Capital. So, Kenneth, I hope your line is clear. So, are you there, Kenneth? Don't see Kenneth. You're being... I don't know, is it me that's being disconnected, or is it the speaker? Johan, can you hear me?
Is Christian back?
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. We are definitely having technical problems today. I was trying to reach out to Kenneth. I can't see him among the participants, so I don't know what happened there. So let's try it again.
Mute, Christian.
Oh, you can't. Okay, so I was trying to get hold of Kenneth while Ronald is trying to sort out his... Ronald, since Kenneth's not there, try again. I'll reach out to Kenneth Legezi, the last speaker, while you're speaking. So try again. Hopefully it will work this time. Ronald, try again. If you can, get through.
Oh. Johan, can you hear me?
Yeah, now the sound is great.
Now we can hear you.
Clearly.
You've changed your microphone?
Well, I lost my video. I hope that helps. I hope you can hear my voice at least.
Yes, now we can hear you much, much better.
All right, super. Great. Sorry about that. Yeah, I guess I'll just quickly go to the addition I want to make to the conversation. I think one of the things which is key, and I hope that the network can be able to work on, is this idea that what the entrepreneur needs right now is to hear stories of this working. And I think Amit earlier talked about the challenge of defining what impact investing. It is kind of a hazy conversation. I totally agree with him that there is need for more information to be able to have this done. But specifically for what you'd call the small and medium businesses, I think one of the things which is key is to see testimony of it working, being able to see a journey which has happened. Because even in the stories which Doris has mentioned, especially the smaller businesses which have managed to get investment, ideally it is a journey of helping them as businesses to be able to grow in terms of their governance, to be able to improve in terms of the way they operate. And I think for me, that is where the synergy is strongest, because that idea that the stories can be shared, but more importantly, the fact that we can be able to see a business be able to be picked from a point where it is not ready to receive impact investment, but it can be able to grow to that point where it can receive it. I think that commitment is one of the most important things. So for me, it is one of the things which I feel like as a country we need is more of the success stories that have happened. And Doris mentioned that there are a couple which have happened. I think those need to be projected. But also this synergy and the connection with other countries which are doing this. For us here as a country, one of the places which we look up to is Kenya, where they have done much better, largely in the impact investing space. And we believe that there are even better stories in Europe and others. So for me, I think that synergy is one of the important things which is missing, so that we hear stories of this happening. Someone mentioned earlier about the fact that businesses need to look beyond profit. But I think there are many businesses which have not yet defined that thing called looking beyond profit. They feel like they're impact investors. Rather, they are working in areas which are making impact, but they don't look at it that way. So I think that the importance of defining the story clearly, so that we see what success means, and we are also able to see which businesses have been able to cross through. That's one of the important things. I think the second thing which comes to me is the ecosystem work. One of the things which I think the UEI attempted to do, the Uganda entrepreneur ecosystem, is to bring players to be able to get these conversations going. Now, what we have noticed is that the process of getting people to talk takes much, much longer than we thought. It seemed like getting them into a room was all we needed to do, but the process of getting people to work together is something which takes time. And one of the things which we think really helps is to be able to also talk about where it has worked, how it has worked in other parts of the world, and how we can be able to borrow some quick lessons in that. Because ideally, here we keep calling it working in silos. It seems like what the ecosystem has been doing, everyone works in a bit of a silo, but constantly having those conversations going and pushing the pin. And for me, from the conversations which we had earlier, I hope that that's one of the things which can be enhanced through these initiatives, because it's really one of the things which we need, those conversations happening and becoming stronger. It's through those conversations where the entrepreneur can meet the investor. It's through those conversations where the entrepreneur can meet the support which they need. And I think that idea is something which really needs more work. And for me, that's why this is an exciting conversation. I think my final bit is on the definition of impact. I think one of the things which is, I don't know how to put this, but how to localize the impact definition in terms of what does impact mean in different parts of the world, or how do we make it a ground up movement so that impact is defined locally and supported. One of the things is that when we see a lot of the funds which come to invest, they already in a way have a definition of impact, and that definition is sometimes being pasted on an entrepreneurial ecosystem, which kind of defines it differently. And it may be informal in their definition, but that's fundamentally what they believe. So for me, finding the capacity to bring together how impact is, and for example, an external investor will come and say, this is what impact means, but how the local business can also be able to help define for you what impact means, so that you can find areas and synergies where you can be able to meet. I'll give you an example of one sector. In Uganda, for example, you look at the education sector, it's largely supported by private sector players. And so there are so many private schools which kind of make the sector hold together. given the so many challenges which we have in raising just enough money to be able to give a strong education system. But when you ask most schools, they are not looking for an impact investor. And besides the point that besides the fact that actually what they are doing in a way is transforming the community or offering affordable education in a country which really, really needs it. So for me, I think that how we bring the conversation of how the external investor defines impact and how locally it is defined. I think that's one of the things the network also needs to do. What does impact mean to different people and how do they define it? So that we can be able to see whether there are areas of synergy where we can be able to work together. But I'm so excited. I hope one of my quick questions will be, how do we engage more in this? How do we keep this conversation going? I think that's my question I'll ask in the Q&A. But since I have the mic now, I'll throw it in. Thanks a lot, Christian. Over to you.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much for these remarks, Ronald. Very interesting. I don't know. There's one person who's online who hasn't put his name. I don't know if you, Kenneth, because I can see Kenneth is online, but I don't know if you managed to log into. You said are you there, Kenneth? No. Okay. In any case, so we are 2 speakers down, which of course doesn't give the complete picture of what the ecosystem looks like in Uganda, but perhaps we can capture some of that through the Q&A. So let me just quickly share my screen. Is that some? Can it coming on there? Can you hear someone getting on?
It was not Kenneth.
That's not Kenneth. Okay. Okay, that's a pity because he was looking very much forward to speaking today. Okay, so we'll just move quickly to the Q&A. Let me start by raising a few questions, and then everyone who's attending, feel free to chip in. So the first question from my side is that, as we've already heard from the 2 speakers, is that there has been an increased interest in impact investing in Africa, generally speaking. And such efforts faced, of course, challenges such as unpredictability, issues of capacity, market volatility. So capacity continues to be a major obstacle for the social impact investment, and it's difficult to find companies in Africa that are investment ready. I suppose this is also the case as we've heard in Uganda, and if so, why? And what are some of the leading barriers to investment in Uganda? Doris or Rona, I don't know if one of you will attempt to answer that question briefly. So, because I have many questions, and we also want to bring the floor in with their questions.
Okay, thanks, Christian. So you mentioned investment readiness as an issue. Yes, that is present. Why? For several reasons that can primarily be classified along three areas. So either, or rather, lack of flow of investment dollars into enterprises can be classified into 3 areas. So either it's awareness, so there are a lot of companies out there that could potentially qualify for this sort of financing, but they don't know. Or it's willingness, so the companies that could potentially qualify for say private equity venture capital financing and are aware of it might not want to absorb it for various reasons. Maybe some of them are family owned, loss of control is a major reason, or there are those that are aware and willing, and that is where the investment readiness component comes in, but are they ready to absorb the capital? So most of the issues are either governance-based, corporate governance, or has to do with the financial accounting systems or strategy. So elements such as those are common problems in Ugandan enterprises. Maybe some are keeping 2 sets of books. And so they need there's some that just need a bit of panel beating. Are investment ready? adjacent, but just need a bit of panel beating. And we have an ecosystem that has a significant number of actors that are helping enterprises with that, achieving that investment readiness. So they go in, they just do a bit of, help them do a bit of panel beating, and then match them to investors. So there are a couple of these within the East Africa Venture Capital Association network in Uganda. And there are a few programs as well. We call them matchmaking or digital facility programs. So there are a number of donor-funded programs that are present. And essentially what they do is they provide pre-investment technical assistance to those enterprises that are adjacent to being investment ready and help match them. So there are solutions already in the market for this problem.
Okay, great. Second question, it's more to you, Ronald. So while the labor pool is robust, workforce development skills, relevant training to key sectors are definitely also lacking in Uganda. So what could you elaborate a little bit more on what you're doing to help address this important constraint to the inflow of impact investing in Uganda?
I think, thank you for that question. I think as Enterprise Uganda, a lot of our focus has been on helping the businesses at the startup and at the growth stage. So largely what we offer is support on the journey for the business. And we work all over the country currently, and you would say a lot of our work is with what you'd call the more of the micro and the small businesses which are starting. One of the things which we're seeing, and I think Doris mentioned about the fact that there are a couple of players who are preparing businesses to be investor ready. We work slightly below the investor ready section by getting the business to that level to say, do they have a governance structure in place? Do they have systems which they have set up at their, are they doing their books well? Have they built an entrepreneurial mindset? So that's likely the work which we have been doing. We think that there is need for work at all levels currently. One of the things is how we and when you look at one of the challenges to impact investing is that when an impact investor comes, even ticket sizes, as an example, I mean, Doris mentioned earlier that we have ticket sizes between $250,000 to $2 million. Now, there are so many businesses which are operating in the space of $20,000 to $100,000, and you find that an impact investor may be surprised that that's the group he needs to deal with, because how many do you need for it to be a worthwhile to take your time to say that you're investing? So we kind of have a gap in that space, how we help the business to grow from being 20,000 to 25,000 so that it can be ready for possibly the majority of the impact investors who are around. So that for us, and I think one of the things which was mentioned, which Doris mentioned about the local investor, the local investment which is growing. I think there's something called High Innovator Lab, which is partly supported, I think, by MasterCard and the National Social Security Fund, which is kind of looking at smaller ticket sizes. I think there's a big need for that group, which the majority of the businesses are micro, they are small, very few are medium, but there is a space there which needs to be filled. And for me, if you ask me where the gap actually exists right now, it is how we help the small businesses to be able to get to that medium level, and what kind of investment and support do they need. And really what they need is blended services. So you'll find a business which the owner started and they're employing some 5 family members, and then they're possibly got another 3 or 4 employees, and possibly it's a big poultry farm or something like that. But you find that how you get that person to prepare that person to be able to receive an investment of $250,000, that's a long journey. It's a journey of telling them you need to have a board in place, and how do you if we are family members, do we need a board? Because we go at home and we talk about this. Do we need a formalized board? Because when the investor comes to the business, want to understand how you invest in a business which doesn't have at least a basic of a board, and talk about all the other operations and systems. So I think there's still a gap there, and that's one of the ones which I feel more work needs to be done.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ronald. Of course, I said I have many questions, but I'll allow everyone to chip in. So, any other questions that you would like to ask the two representatives of the ecosystem in Uganda? Cassidy, yeah, please go ahead, Cassidy.
This opportunity. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Great. So there is something that I really wanted to, I have like two questions. Like, how would you measure impact? And the donor funds and their activity back, let's say in Uganda, I don't know if there's an investor on this call, but I would ask, for instance, what would be your motivation to, let's say, for instance, invest back home here? I know it's a very broad question, but most of the deals that I see coming through Uganda mostly, they are mostly about, startups that are more inclined to like global goals or like new and emerging technologies, and that invest of that they can easily qualify for investment, as opposed to the kinds of businesses that you see every day that people are actually running back home. So I don't know if someone can help shed some light on that. One, how do you measure impact? How about the donor funds? Do we consider them as investment that is driven to impact? And finally, like, when the investors' motivation back home here in Uganda, is it aligned to the needs of the people and communities and the change that they want to come about? Or is it basically based on global, trajectory in terms of, like, let's say, new and emerging technology, etc.?
Okay.
Thank you so much. I hope those have been understood.
I think, Cassidy, I would like to do a one-on-one with you on that, because it's a little bit beyond the scope of this specific webinar today, which is addressing, let's say, the 5 pillars of the impact investing ecosystem, which storage represent more or less the supply side and Ronald the demand side. It's a little bit more general question. I'm happy you can connect with me on EndNest, and we can have this conversation maybe tomorrow or early next week. Happy to address that specific question. But thank you for raising that. Yeah, Johan?
And by the way, I have shared the invitation link from Christian's 4IP group, so that anybody who is in this call and not yet fully inside of EndNest, you have an opportunity of being invited by Christian's 4IP group, and that will simplify the further communication that I think we're all looking for among trusted people and organizations to create the further synergies together.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Was that a hand, Jill?
It was, yes. Can you hear me? Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Jill.
Okay. I just want to come back to you on pretty much everything that's been said very quickly, and also on the question that was just asked. I'm coming to you from wearing 2 hats. I'm actually a former private banker. I've looked at funds, I've looked at investments, I've been on that side of things for many years. So I would say to you that the perspective of the people who are actually selling investments and doing investments is really quite different. You asked what were some of the different elements that needed to be considered. I would have to tell you that, in all honesty, what is going to bother potential investors about Uganda is the same as many parts of Africa, and that is the problem of the political situation, which is undeniable, and the problem of corruption. and that is there as well. Now I'll put on my other hat, which is speaking as somebody who is working with a group that is raising funds to send to a school in Uganda. Our hope through doing that is actually we've just bought them their first computer with a projector. The idea is to bring current events into the ground level. You've mentioned right at the beginning of this presentation, a very large percentage of Uganda's population is very young, under age 25. And our hope is to use the students to reach out to a whole generation and start a conversation about corruption and the tremendous harm that it does to a country's reputation and to its ability to sell itself and to sell its businesses. It's going to be very difficult to do that in a country which has had the same leader for so many years, and which is going to be very tricky in the future because he's an old man and nobody lives forever. What happens when he goes? And it could be quite tricky. And this will be an undeniable element that will come up. Our hope is that by getting hold of our students, there are 200 of them in this school, and making each and every one of them an ambassador to the current generation coming up, spreading information, news, the BBC, Radio Canada, any other country, that would be a big help. Let's not forget, I have a Ukrainian refugee who stays in my home. She's a former flight attendant. She did a lot of flying through Africa. And she said every time she took off from Mali, which was frequent, the first thing they flew over was an absolutely massive airfield, which has been paid for and sponsored by the Putin government. And the population of Mali think that Vladimir Putin is God. And this is going to be a problem. And it's going to be a problem everywhere unless we all start chipping in and paying attention. As a Canadian, I would love to see Canada get more involved. As a Swiss resident, I'd love to see the Swiss get more involved, although I can see that's going to be a challenge. But in all honesty, I think those are going to be your two biggest bugbears. And I really do hope that by working with the next young generation, that we can help you to counter that. Over and out.
Yeah, thank you, Jill. I was going to announce you after the Q&A as for you to proceed. I don't know if that was your pitch now or whether...
it could be. We could use that as my pitch right now. I can go into further detail. I realize how short you are on time, so I didn't want to take up too much.
Okay,
but,
just a second, Jill. Just so before we go into that and the background for that, just to wind up on the Q&A with on the impact investing ecosystem in Uganda. Are there any further questions to our two speakers? And I apologized for the absence of the other speakers. Any last burning question? Don't forget that what we don't manage to discuss today, we can continue the conversation online on EdNest. So we will be able, and I guess also the speakers, to answer you in writing. But any last burning question? I can't see anything. Can you see anything, Johan? Yeah, Ronald, please go ahead. For last concluding remark, Ronald, go ahead. We can't hear you, Ronald.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Super. Great. Thanks. I just wanted to kind of respond to Jill's comment. I think it's a very good comment. Certainly from the outside of Africa, from the outside of any country, this is what is clearly seen. And I think it's important to connect it to business. But I guess for me, one of the things which I just wanted to add to that conversation is that it could be possible that also impact investing in itself can cause a transformation in other areas. And I think it may be a subtle way of seeing how better institutions can be run. Because I guess when you look at the focus has largely been how can the political space be transformed. And a lot has been said about issues of issues of good governance, especially from the political perspective. But what we don't hear enough is issues of good governance in business and the importance of that in running an efficient institution. And for me, I think that that is the transformative capacity impact investing can have. That if you found a business which has been run in a rather efficient way and it transforms into an efficient and possibly a regional kind of, in my opinion, comes to mind for me is the mobile telephone industry and how it has caused transformation to a point that there were government fees which couldn't be paid, which had to be paid in cash, and there was corruption because you had to pay them in cash. But the fact that mobile money is there now, you can find that the system is becoming more transparent because of that investment in there. So I think it's a two-way, and a lot of effort has been put in how the political institutions can be able to transform. And if you look at like the big NGO movement in many countries, a lot of it has focused on that. But in my opinion, what we are not hearing enough is this idea that how can we have better governance in business? And that conversation starts from how is an efficient business run? And if you run an efficient one, wherever it is born in the world, it can be able to grow everywhere. And I feel like that in itself can cause transformation in other spaces. So I think that's a bit which I wanted to add, that impact investing in itself can have a transformative power in many of our nations by showing how good institutions can be run if they are running in those businesses.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ronald. During our last series where we focused on Kenya, the lead of the task force, Mr. Arif Neki, he talked about the NABII as being a trusted network of networks. So maybe from that perspective, I would allow Doris maybe to provide a few concluding remarks to say how do you see, as an association within an umbrella association such as the National Advisory Board, what would you like the NABII to do to defend the interest of your members, which is a supply side of impact capital? Are there a few things that you would like the NABII to address in the strategy that they will have to implement during a 3-year period in order to join, let's say, the club of national advisory boards around the world?
Yeah, a bit on the spot there, Christian.
If you have any other things you would like to conclude with, Doris, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So from a supplier's perspective, from a suppliers of capital perspective, and I think this is a sentiment that is reflected by all, is that if you want to invest where your values are, then Africa is the place to invest for impact. Because if you're investing, say, some talked about emerging technology as a key area of focus. So if you're investing in a fintech, it's not just a fintech, it's a fintech that's actually addressing development gaps. So Africa, and more broadly, and of course Uganda is within that, is a good sandbox for impact investors, and we will be tracking to see what the NABII can achieve going forward, and potentially explore areas of collaboration.
Okay. So thank you so much for these suggestions, Doris, and thank you also to Ronald. So as you can see from the agenda, we have put Mrs. Jill Monet on the agenda. As you know, impact investing is not related to grants or philanthropy. But as you also know, the Swiss Impact Investing Association, we have been very much engaged with faith-based investment. And it so happened that my own church, Saint Robert here in Fune, was celebrating its 125th anniversary this weekend. And during the event, there was a tombola, as well as a presentation by Jill, whereby she presented the important works that she's doing with capacitating the young children in Uganda. So I thought that since we are having our focus on Uganda today, that this would be an opportunity for her to say a few words about the great work that she's doing with the children in Uganda. So Jill, if you, in a few words, if you could just summarize and how we can, the members of the Ugandan as well as the global impact investing ecosystem, could support what you have set up in Uganda. So over to you, Jill.
Thank you. I really, really appreciated this invitation. As I said, I do wear two hats, you know, the one being the financial and the other being the charitable work. We have been helping out the Divine Mercy School in Kyotera for over 10 years now. My own daughter went down there for 3 weeks to oversee some of the works that we had paid for. It's a school that provides a secondary education for children, many of whom are AIDS orphans and who would not otherwise have that opportunity for schooling. As I said, we have just presented them with their first computer. We were able, when Christian was there at the church on Sunday, to have our first direct live streaming with the school. And that was so exciting for everybody, both the people in Uganda and in Fune. And I'm hoping to use this to stimulate conversation with the students and bring a lot more awareness about many things. I'm hoping to give a class once a week. This would be to, you know, I mean, one of the topics of conversation would be, for instance, the fact that today Boris Johnson got a slap across the face for misbehavior in England, and that this can actually be a good thing when you can get rid of your political leader rather quickly if he doesn't behave himself. When there was COVID, when there was Ebola, I was in constant communication with the school about how to deal with it. If somebody has Ebola and sadly dies, for goodness sakes, don't go touching the body, because this is an incredibly infectious disease. How to handle infection, how to handle various health issues. So we're really hoping to stimulate international knowledge and create new markets for the things that you want to sell locally. Help the people locally who are looking for outside investment to find the best ways to reach out to people and impress them overseas with what they have to sell. All of these things I think will be really helpful with greater communication, because I have to say that Kyotera is very isolated indeed. And so, you know, right now what we are doing, I mean, we're raising money for these computers, amongst other things. I did have a word with them. I said, what would you like me to promote? And they said, well, it would be really cool actually if we could start a fish farm, because that would certainly bring us in some money and we could be more independent. They are also, I don't know if any of you are aware of, and if you aren't, please do have a look. It's so well done. There are the Masaka kids and there are the ghetto kids who took part in Britain's Got Talent, the competition. To my deep disgust, the ghetto kids didn't win. Everybody, I think, felt that they should have done. They come from Uganda and they raise money for themselves and the Masaka kids do the same thing. And the children at Divine Mercy are now looking at doing something similar, where they do a singing and dancing and they put it online to raise money to get the school fees, which are necessary, because the children who attend these schools are actually, I'm sure you all know, they live there. They're not just coming in on a daily basis. And so they do need to pay school fees to pay for their food and their uniforms and the rest of it. And they've been doing this through this format. And so the children at Divine Mercy are hoping to copy the incredible success that the Masaka kids and the ghetto kids have had online. And of course, the way to find out what's going on online is to have a computer. And so our goal at St. Robert's is to provide, I think we're targeting 15 computers for the school. So far, they've got one, but you have to start somewhere. And that's the lot.
Okay. Jill, as you know, as Johan said, Intness is an all-in-one toolbox, so its functions a little bit like Slack as well. So if you'd be so kind maybe to insert a link about the project, and also where participants and those who will watch the event subsequently they
Yes.
can send money so you can get not just one computer but 15 computers. That would be excellent. I will also share it on the LinkedIn websites of SIIA and the 4IP group, because we had hundreds of impressions. So while we're not so many here in real time, there will be a lot of people that will watch the recording subsequently. So if you could share those links so that we can really make sure that they get all of the computers needed, so they can be connected with the rest of the world, since we're living in a digitalization age. So thank you so much, Jill, for being here with us throughout the whole event and for sharing this very important work that you're doing with young people that I'm sure can also be replicated elsewhere. So, so thanks a lot. So let me just quickly conclude today's events. So as you can see, the next event will showcase 4 or 5 of Uganda's leading economic support organizations as seen through the lens of impact investment and social entrepreneurship. And we hope that our new friends at the NABII Uganda Taskforce would kindly recommend a few which we could invite for that event. And then subsequently, as is the case, we will be organizing our quarterly e-pitching event on the 6th of July, whereby impact enterprises that has come through the economic support organization that has been pitching themselves in the previous 5 series, they will have 5 minutes to make a pitch to our investor network. And then in next month, I will be in Cape Town, firstly attending the UN's Impact Standard Training of Trainers course, as well as the Africa Impact Summit, where all of the African NABIs will be present. And I very much look forward to meeting Nema, Amit, and Yakuba, and Arif, and many other members of the NABIs across the continent. And then after that, we'll start a new series, which will focus, since that event will be in South Africa, will be on the South African impact investing ecosystem. And then during the last quarter of the year, Swiss Impact Investing Association will organize an event focusing on the role of institutional investors within impact investing, where we'll look at Denmark, the Netherlands, and Switzerland, as well as Ghana and Nigeria. And we are also organizing an Africa Village together with the International Trade Center, where we hope to showcase some of the work that's being done by the African NABIs, and I will talk to you about that in Cape Town. And then last but not least, I hope to see some of you also at the Global Impact Investing Networks Forum in Copenhagen, my home country, in October. And then after that, we'll start a new series which will focus on Ethiopia. So with that being said, we'd like to thank all of the speakers, all of the attendees for being with us today. Sorry for the technical hiccup. The event, as I said, will be uploaded on 4IP Group and SIIA's YouTube channels shortly. Should you wish to further engage with the organizers or the panelists, please, as I mentioned before, do reach out to us through the EntNest platform. That's the purpose of the EntNest and why we have the series on the EntNest platform. So all that remains to be said is to wish you all a happy, healthy, and successful time until we meet again, and have a pleasant evening. Goodbye to all of you. Bye-bye.